Mira. I am the Executive Director of Robert F. Kennedy's Human Rights Education and Speak Truth to Power that you'll hear about in a second. I want to thank the American Federation of Teachers, Eric and his colleagues for hosting us today. We have had a great partnership over the last 6 or 7 years with respect to the video contest, as well as worked very closely with your Executive Director, Randy Weingarten, in developing our curriculum now 7 or 8 years ago. So we can't do what we do without partners like the American Federation of Teachers, and so we're very thankful for that. I want to thank our participants that you'll hear from shortly. Thank you for taking time. I know this is a busy time of year, but we welcome that. And we're gathered here for what we're calling the launch of a Speak Truth to Power lesson plan called Islamophobia. And we'll get into that in a second. But before we do, I just wanted to tell you real briefly a little bit about Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. We're an organization that, as of next year, has been around for 50 years, one of the oldest human rights organizations in the country. Shortly after Robert F. Kennedy was murdered, some of you may recall, in 1968 while he was running for president, his family and friends came together and said, how do we continue on his legacy? His life was cut short. He was only 42 years old. And so they created the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization that was really meant to carry on his unfinished work. And if there's one common thread that I think is important to remember about Robert Kennedy, he was all about how one person can make a difference. In apartheid South Africa that he traveled to in 1966, he gave what has become known to be the Ripple of Hope speech. And I'd like to think that we're all about creating these ripples, and as he said in the speech, that form a current to tear down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. To me, that's what we're all about. Celebrating how one person can make a difference, but bringing people together and really forming that current, that tsunami, if you will, that can address some of the major human rights issues that we're facing today. Speak Truth to Power was a book that Carrie Kennedy wrote. Carrie is the daughter of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. She's 7th of 11. She is a human rights attorney herself. She wrote this book now about 16 or 17 years ago, where she profiled the stories and interviewed some 51 human rights activists, everybody from Dalai Lama to Wangari Maathai to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and probably not a lot of people that you haven't heard about. But her objective was not really to focus on the horrendous part of their story, and many of them had been, and have been oppressed and tortured and so on and so forth, but rather to celebrate their resistance and how with this resistance they have created change. So it's really a message of hope. The book has been adapted into a play called Speak Truth to Power, Voices from Beyond the Dark by Ariel Dorfman, playwright, human rights activist, staged all over the world by some of the most celebrated actors, Meryl Streep and Sean Penn, Dennis Haysbert, but by far the most powerful performances, and any of you have seen this, are by kids that just embody who these defenders are. It's really a series of monologues, and they have this raw energy that is palpable to the audience. And this is a very effective way, I think, of conveying what we're trying to convey with Speak Truth to Power. And what that is with this play and with the book and some 62 lesson plans featured on American Federation's Share My Lesson program, we tell the story of human rights activists. Many of them are in Carrie's book, and many of them aren't. And today, for instance, we're launching a lesson plan that focuses on 5 Muslim Americans combating religious bigotry in this country. And so if we feel that there's an issue out there that needs to be focused, or a person's story, like let's say Malala, that needs to be told, then we will create a lesson plan. We have lesson plans that reach elementary school, middle school, high school, and university level. We're now in 14 countries around the world. Millions of kids every year learn from Speak Truth to Power. Our goal is to get kids to identify as human rights defenders in their own lives, in their communities, in their schools, and their beyond. So that when they do see a human rights violation, big or small, they abandon the role of bystander, that they do something about it. What we say is you can't afford to be a bystander. Elie Wiesel, who is one of our defenders that for whom we have a lesson plan and featured in the book Speak Truth to Power, I think said it best. He said, "What hurts the victim the most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander." So that's our overall goal. What we're trying to do in terms of our mission is really create a citizenry of people, largely teachers and students, committed to holding their society to the highest standards of human rights. To me, this is the way that we prevent human rights abuses around the world. So we thank you all for being here today, and you are part of this citizenry. In addition to these lesson plans, and every lesson plan ends with, how do you become a defender? How can you become a defender in your own life? It's a service learning project, if you will, here in the United States. So it's an interactive project. And as I said, we've had people embrace this all over the world. I think it's now in 7 or 8 different languages. In addition to the lesson plans, we've also created a music contest, wanting young people to realize that they can create change through music. So we do this in partnership with the Grammy Museum. It's now been in existence, I think, for 3 years. And we've had some wonderful entries. So if any of you are involved in music or know people or teachers that are involved in music, I urge you to consult with our website on that. And we've also created a video contest that Eric referred to earlier. 7 years ago, we partnered with the Tribeca Film Institute and subsequently with the American Federation of Teachers. Again, a way to try to get kids to realize that they can create change through video. So the film contest asked middle school and high school kids to create a 3 to 5 minute video based on a human rights defender, but more importantly, to tell their story and to focus on the issue that that person or persons is advocating on behalf. And so before we talk a little bit more and hear about this lesson plan that we're launching and hear from our participants, I thought we'd take an opportunity to show the grand prize winner. The grand prize winner is premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, which is a wonderful opportunity for these young filmmakers to showcase their work and to be congratulated and celebrated for what they do. Last year, the grand prize winner went to a film about Islamophobia here in the U.S. And it subsequently went viral. It features the work of Dalia Mugahed, who regrettably couldn't be here today, but we have a fine representative in her place. And so why don't we play that, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of How To Vids. This week, how to be an American Muslim. Tip number 1, don't be creative. Don't be like the clock boy and bring something with wires or cords sticking out in the public places.
You're just gonna upset people.
Tip number 2, just step out of line. Don't make a huge thing out of it. If you don't want to be pulled out of line, then don't dress like that. Tip number 3, don't go to these states. By order of the governors, you're not welcome in this state, this state, this state, this state, this state, these states, or this state.
Tip number 4,
don't. The best way to be an American Muslim is not to.
take for example Syrian immigrants. Can they find another?
One, two, three, four!
Hi, meet
Dalia Mugahed.
Dalia Mugahed. Dalia Mugahed.
Please welcome Dalia Mugahed.
She's the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding in Washington, D.C., the CEO of Mugahed Consulting, and an advisor to President Obama. And she'd like you to know, the American Muslim community wants to be a group of citizens, not a pool of suspects. Which basically means they just want respect. And that sounds like a reasonable request. Well, to some. Remember Ahmed Mohammed, the high school freshman known as Clockboy, who was wrongfully accused by one of his teachers of having a bomb in school? Later, he met President Obama. He triumphantly returned to his community in Texas, ready to see a changed and more tolerant place. Only to find armed militants to be stopping Muslims from entering his mosque and death threats at his door. This type of treatment got so bad that it caused Ahmed and his family to move away to Qatar. An American citizen being driven from the country That doesn't sound like a respected community or American. When Donald Trump, the leading candidate in the GOP polls, was confronted with the idea of electronically tracking Muslims, he said,
"Oh, I would certainly implement that."
Remember those governors who don't want Muslims in their states? They've also said they don't want to let Muslims in the country altogether. People who have left their homes because they couldn't go 30 minutes without being bombed traveled all the way to America just to find out that the American dream is dead. This isn't a problem that will just go away. Anti-Muslim hate crimes are still 5 times more common today than before 9/11. These crimes break most of the principles on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is where Dahlia Mogahed comes in. She believes the problem can be solved by understanding and information.
There's a lot of misunderstanding.
For example, according to the FBI, 94% of terrorist attacks in the US have been by non-Muslims. And the majority of mass shooters in the US have been white. However,
people shout out. I'm not saying all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
My response is all of them except the vast majority who are not.
if they just understood these facts, they wouldn't be so prejudiced. Another ridiculous thing is how Muslims are assumed to be with ISIS or support them unless they say otherwise. After the Paris terror attacks, many Muslims took to social media to send out the message, "Not in my name," which is great, until you realize.
The killing of civilians is, to me, about the most monstrous thing you can do. And to be suspected of doing something so monstrous simply because of your faith seems very unfair.
They shouldn't be required to show their religion isn't one of hate. There's no special rules for them. There's no how to being an American Muslim. You just are. And it's at moments like these, when to be Muslim you have to overcome physical threats, that people like Dahlia Mogahed matter the most. Because without them to show everyone else what to aspire to be, without them to stand up to hate, without them to protect the people who can't protect themselves, the world wouldn't be the same. When the tired, the poor, the huddled masses come looking for America, let's give them something to find.
That subsequent to the premiere of that at the Tribeca Film Festival last year, the film went viral. I don't know exactly what the numbers are. It was a huge group of people that actually have seen it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing today in terms of launching our lesson plan on Islamophobia, and there are copies of it, an abridged version up there at the end of the room. What we're trying to do with this lesson is to break down stereotypes about people who are Muslim, increase their understanding and knowledge of the Muslim majority countries, increase understanding and knowledge of Islam, and examine similarities and differences between other ethnic or religious groups. The lesson plan does not aim to cover the full study of a group of people and a major world religion. The aim of the lesson is to provide a point of entry. And most importantly, the lesson plan is an attempt to try to get people activated in combating and tackling Islamophobia and religious bigotry. So it provides examples of ways that students and teachers can engage in that and have their students become actively engaged in combating this form of hate. It asks the question, who is a Muslim? What is the religion of Islam? Where is Islam practiced and how is it spread throughout history? What are the Muslim majority countries? And in doing so, it features 5 Muslim activists that we spoke about earlier. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have to my left Mona Al-Hayani. Pronounce it correctly? Yeah. You know, I did live in Sudan for 2 years, and I spoke a little bit of Arabic, but it's thank you. Shukran. Mona is the Vice President of the Toledo Federation of Teachers and the Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Issues for the Federation. history teacher at Toledo Early College High School, as well as being a Speak Truth to Power lead educator. We worked with Mona for a number of years, and she's participated in the video contest in a number of our trainings. So welcome today, Mona, and thank you for flying in from all the way from Toledo. To my right is Mira Nagaz, who's the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where Adalia Mogahed, who you just saw, works as well. Prior to joining ISPU, Mira worked in the international development and health sector for more than a decade, where she led institutions and programs in Central and South America. Welcome, Mira. To my left is Sahel Khan, who serves as the Director for External Affairs at Microsoft and is a Senior Fellow at the Institute of Global Engagement. Sahel served on Capitol Hill in the Bush administration, in the White House, and at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Welcome, Sahel. And to my right is Mohammed Abdelkader. Mohammed is the new Executive Director of the Stevens Initiative at the Aspen Institute. He served in the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary in International and Foreign Language Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Welcome, Mohammed. I think what we'll do is we'll start with Mona to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing to combat religious bigotry in Ohio and around the world.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. You know, Ohio is one of those states where you have pockets of Muslims throughout, and Dearborn, we're close to Dearborn, we're about 40 minutes from Dearborn in Michigan, where there is a huge Muslim population. So there is a connection. The Islamic Center of Greater Toledo, of which I am on the council, we were one of the first established North American mosques in the country. And you know, my parents came here from Iraq and Lebanon, and they helped build it. So my whole life has been focused on educating the community. My mother is a professor, PhD in Islamic jurisprudence and family law. So I'm lucky because I learned from them how to educate others about Islam. And with that said, what we do in the classroom, I think, is the most important piece to ending religious bigotry, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, because we can't forget that anti-Semitism is also on the rise, and we are seeing in Toledo, we've had many of our synagogues attacked. Our mosque after 9/11 was arsoned, $2 million worth of damage, no one was hurt. So our community has come together to help combat this. The Islamic Center of Greater Toledo, we hold teacher seminars. My mother and I put on teacher seminars every year. Last year we had 500 teachers from around the state of Ohio come. The Imam Talal Eid, who was also part of the former Bush administration as a liaison to Islam, he really has a way of talking to people and making them understand the myths and stereotypes about Islam. And those are some of the things we do, but as I said, in the classroom, it's the most important thing. In the state of Ohio, the state academic content standards were negative about Islam. Myself and a group of teachers got together and we lobbied the Ohio Department of Education to change some of that language, because really a lot of our teachers do not even understand Islam or Judaism or any of the major religions, not because they are not intelligent people, because our universities are not preparing them for the content standards. So those are some things that I've done, but most importantly at the classroom level, we need to go through our students in order to change the perceptions. So, and one of the things I'm really happy about is the AFT Teach Human Rights website that, you know, Eric brought me in to help with. We created some activities about Islamophobia, religious bigotry. There's a lot of lessons on there that teachers can just pull out. The goal is to look at contemporary issues about Islam and to relate them to students. They see something on the news about Syrian refugees, make it a learning moment, and having a wealth of resources is really important. And as John said, I've been participating in Speak Truth to Power for many years now, and we're going to show you a video that my students created. They won Platinum Honorable Mention. They didn't win the big prize, but but I have made Speak Truth to Power the contest part of the curriculum. It is part of, I am the National Honor Society Advisor. It is part of the curriculum. They cannot become an honor student unless they create one of these videos, because part of being an honor student goes way beyond scholarship. We're talking about character and service and leadership. And although I had a lot of resistance in the beginning, the students have realized that these videos open a door for them to teach other students about the topics that they've chosen to create in their videos. So the video we're going to see was created by Chad Atkins, Katie Jakely, Italia Fernandez, and Laura Sahmarani. And I won't give it any other introduction. It's the first time they did a video, and I'm very proud of them.
Want to be in an arranged marriage because I want to have my freedom and also want to be successful.
Because why would I spend my life with someone who I don't even know?
To have my own freedom and my own choice.
It's not something I would want to be a part of, because it's not really someone you could love because someone else chose it for you.
I think that people should be able to pick their own mates. I just can't imagine doing it for myself, to be honest.
I feel like marriage is supposed to be based upon a love and relationship between a partner, and I think you should be deciding that for yourself, as you should be spending the rest of your life with it. It's a marriage.
As of right now, I don't think so. I don't think I'd ever be able to think about that.
Let me whisper to you my words, so no one knows I speak of the selling of girls.
This isn't how it was supposed to be. They always told us stories that had happy endings, the ones that led to true love and a happily ever after. But that's all they were, stories. Ones that gave us false hope and fake dreams and the wrong plans for the future. Truth is, we didn't get to plan our own future. Our parents had already planned it for us.
Women must remain silent. This is the city's tradition. They sell girls for money, no right to choose.
There is no way out. According to my own father, I must follow our traditions with no exception. Like all other girls, I am caged. What can I do to prove my personhood?
They repeat that it is time to sell me, but I have never even met this girl. My parents don't care. I am seen as a sheep grown only to be devoured. Have you ever seen a sheep as emotional as I am? I am a person too.
The selling, the arrangements, it seems as if it is impossible to escape. I'm a human, not just an item on a store shelf. What did I do wrong?
It hurts when there are no feelings, when you are in a stranger's embrace.
I feel ashamed to be forced into this marriage. Maybe escape and suicide are terribly stupid, but what can one do if there's no support?
I fear for my future.
A voice.
A voice must be heard.
I have to forget my dreams. In one moment, I felt all my dreams disappeared, and I was looking for a way to escape it, looking for a way to share my message with other people. So then And the only way I had it was to use rap.
According to Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. Sunita Alazetta's parents tried to force her into marriage when she was just 16 years old. This event inspired her to write her hit rap song, Brides for Sale, which gives a voice to those silently suffering in their own unhappy marriages. Today, Alazetta raps to raise awareness of the marriage issue, as well as the inequalities and hardships which exist in less fortunate countries, such as her home country of Afghanistan. Alazetta hopes that this awareness will prompt others to take a stand against forced marriage and change the societal expectations of youth in these countries.
Created a lesson on Sunita, and I don't know if you caught this in the video. The students attempted to dispel what is really in the Quran and what is cultural. And I think that really speaks volumes to what we need to do in order to end religious bigotry.
And I think I need to talk to the organizers of this film contest because that deserves more than just an honorable mention. Who should I talk to? No, that was great. And as Moni did mention, we did launch the Sunita lesson plan. When was it, Karen? A couple months ago. Yep. And it has received a lot of attention. And so I urge you, it's on our website. So please have a look. And now if we could open it up to hear from our participants, and then we will open it up for a larger discussion. But why don't we start with you, Mira? And I know that you are here to talk about what your organization is doing, but also to share with us some of the data and the facts regarding religious bigotry and Islamophobia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So facts got a really bad rap in the last election cycle, but I think they still matter. And I think we know that they still matter because people spend so much time refuting them and actually saying that they're false. So I think facts still matter. And a very wise man named W. Edward Deming said a long time ago that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And I think that's very true, and as an organization, we take that very seriously. Opinions do matter, but facts really do matter as well. Our organization, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, better known as ISPU, we are a research organization, or a think and do tank, and our mission is really to conduct research, objective and solution-seeking research that empowers the American Muslim community. And our focus is on two things. One is community development, so we do research that can underpin American Muslim community development, and we also do research that can underpin public policy issues and the removing of barriers to inclusion and participation for the American Muslim community in the wider American society. Dahlia is in fact our research director, so a lot of the facts and data and analysis that we generate exists with her, her research team. And we do have a lot of data that I think is very relevant to the discussion of anti-Muslim bigotry, especially when it comes to children. So, for example, we know from a survey that we conducted back in January that the vast majority of American Muslims have experienced some form of religious-based discrimination in the previous year, so throughout the 2016 cycle, or throughout 2016. More than 60% of American Muslims expressed they'd experienced some form of religious-based discrimination in that period. And the people who were most impacted by that, who had higher levels, were women, young people, and Arab Muslims. So young people are disproportionately affected by the current climate. I think what's more concerning from our data is that 43% of Muslim families in America have at least one child that has been bullied in the past year because of their religion. So nearly half of American Muslim families are dealing with this problem. For me, the most shocking thing about this, though, was that in a quarter of these instances, a teacher or school official was actually involved as a perpetrator. I think that is really important for us to understand, because it's not just kids being kids. The geopolitical climate and the negative rhetoric and the atmosphere is really, is causing some adults to act really badly too towards children. We also know from our research that 74% of these incidents were reported. So it's underreporting to the officials, right? There's at least a quarter of bullying incidents that have not been reported. We can talk a lot more about this later. Just to tell you a little bit about myself and why I care so deeply about this. I grew up with a Christian father who was the product of a Protestant Catholic marriage, which at that time was an absolute no-no. And then my father went and married a Jewish woman, which again, at the time was not very common. And then I turned around and married a Muslim man. So we've had multiple generations of people who've not really played by the rules in some way. And I had experienced some anti-Semitism and some experiences when I was young, but the first moment in my life where I was actually really terrified and afraid came on my honeymoon, actually, when my husband and I were on a train and we were speaking a garbled mix of English and Arabic. I speak a little bit of Arabic, just like you. And we were threatened by a group of skinheads who were sitting next to us, and they physically threatened both of us, and nobody on the train stood up. No one did anything. We were completely on our own. I was 25, no idea what to do. And I remember being really shocked that, here were two people having a good time just speaking in a language that wasn't English, and that nobody stood up to do anything. We found out later, as we pulled into the next station and were greeted by about 60 policemen, that someone had indeed gone to the train conductor and had them call the police, but we didn't know that at the time, and we felt very, very alone. So I don't want anyone to feel that alone ever again. So that's why I do this.
Those are compelling facts that we'll talk about in a second. Sahel.
First, thanks for including me this morning. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you and also to learn, especially from others' experiences. As was said in the intro, I'm probably the one skunk at the garden party here, being so right-winger, but that's okay. Kind of used to it. But I'm grateful, actually, seriously, that you guys did include me, because I do hope that as we all work towards religious freedom for all and for inclusion of all Americans, regardless of their background, that we can do that in a very thoughtful manner, particularly those of you that are serving as teachers in our communities across the country. I definitely was the product of some very caring and thoughtful teachers who made all the difference. And so I definitely am grateful for the work that you do every day in the lives of young people. There were two things that I wanted to share, just at least at this moment. The first is there's no doubt that there has been a growing spike in anti-Muslim and, as has been said, bigotry towards others in the country, whether they be immigrants of Hispanic background, Jewish Americans, and the country is very divided, and we don't need to look at the headlines to know that. We can just know that even from our everyday lives, and there are a host of reasons why those divisions have occurred. Part of it is the world of social media and instant information. And when I was growing up, we had news once a day at 7 o'clock. There were 3 networks that you turned on, and you had something of a national narrative. And even though, you know, my father might be unhappy with one particular news story, or I might cringe at another, generally speaking, the country had some sense of a national narrative and a shared narrative. Well, that's changed. And the good news about that is that we have an explosion of information and access to information and the ability to learn more about various subjects, you know, at our fingertips. But the unfortunate byproduct of that technology is that many have become very siloed in what they learn and see, and have become very close-minded to learning other viewpoints, regardless of what those viewpoints might be. And so, while there has been, you know, tremendous access to facts and information, ironically, for many people, that has actually led to many closing their minds and their hearts to learning and to accepting others, particularly people that are not like themselves. And so, having seen that, and just that change in our society, I think it's very important to think about validators and who those validators are for a particular audience. And so, you know, I just looking at this last election cycle, for example, and again, I'm more on the winger side of the political aisle, but even my friends who were very conservative unanimously said, you know, when Khizr Khan spoke at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, you know, Gold Star father whose son had given his life courageously for his country, no one could assail his devotion to our country, and the fact that he was holding the Constitution up as he was making his remarks at the convention, as bravely as he was, really underscored for many, on both sides of the political aisle and on the social aisle, the message that he was talking about patriotism, about inclusion, about not discriminating and having prejudice against others, including Muslim Americans. And so and that, you know, thinking back, as was said in my intro, I did serve on the staff of George W. Bush for 8 years, and I remember that, you know, I was in the White House for 9/11, and it was actually both he and the First Lady's idea to visit the mosque here in Washington, D.C. It was the first time that a sitting president had ever visited a mosque in the United States. President Eisenhower had laid the cornerstone, a little bit of trivia for that mosque, but by the time it was actually opened, he had left office, and no president had ever visited a mosque. And he felt, because he was from Texas and had many Muslim friends and neighbors, and also because of the service of Norman Mineta in his cabinet, a Japanese American from my hometown of San Jose, California, who had been arrested and locked up for 3 years in Cody, Wyoming, only because his last name was of Japanese origin. The president felt it was very important to go to a mosque and to send a clear message to our fellow Americans that, yes, we're going to prosecute those who had murdered 3,000 of our fellow citizens, but we're not going to engage in the scapegoating and the stereotyping that unfortunately we have in times past, including during World War II and the days after the Pearl Harbor attacks on December 7, 1941. I think it was very important at that time to hear that from the president. And, you know, regardless of your politics, I think it was very important to hear that from an evangelical, Christian, Republican, conservative president. Because the fact is, and even though I'm a proud conservative, most, if you look at polls, much of the animosity and fear and sometimes even hatred towards Muslims and other immigrants come from particularly conservative Christians. And so that is the target audience. If you are thinking about who these messages need to resonate with, and so that's why it's so important that the messenger be somebody that has some credence and respect within that target audience, whether those be the students in the classrooms, their parents, or just in our everyday lives. The other thing that I would say is to really be thoughtful about giving people an on-ramp to do the right thing. One of the unfortunate things that sometimes those of us who care about these issues of inclusion and fairness and freedom for all is that we often, because these are such powerful, emotional, and strongly felt moral issues, sometimes we let our moral positions in some ways make others to feel lesser because of the viewpoints they hold that may be different from ours. And so the idea really to be careful is to give people the opportunity to come and do the right thing. I'll give you an example, again, that is just very recent. I grew up in the Bay Area, and as I mentioned, and so if you were, I joke, if you drank white wine and ate sushi and had a car that was probably made in, Europe or Asia, you were a Niners fan. But if you wore a suit that was made of rubber and took a shower after work, you probably were a Raiders fan. And one of my friends, who was an Oakland Raiders fan that I grew up with, who also happened to be Muslim, was at the Football Hall of Fame ceremony late last year in Canton, Ohio. And they were honoring a guy named Kenny the Snake Stabler. Yeah. And he was called the Snake because he like other Raiders were known to be a little fast and loose with the rules. So there he was. He was
both on and off the field.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there he was in Canton, Ohio, huge Hall of Fame event, thousands and thousands of people in a huge stadium. But being a devout Muslim, time for prayer came, so he kind of snuck off into a corner where no one could see him to offer his prayers very quickly. Well, while he was praying, a large guy that he described as straight out of Central Casting for Duck Dynasty started to come out towards him, and not in a friendly way, but in a very menacing way, kind of hovering around him. My friend was, of course, engaged in his prayer, so he proceeded. And then when he finished, and of course, when you're finished, you're in the seated position, this guy was standing over him. And my friend was just very, very nervous. He's a father of 3, he's by himself, no one can see him. And the guy said to him in a very menacing way, he asked him, "Are you a Muslim?" And my friend said, yeah, kind of meekly. He said, "Well, I don't like Muslims of what I see of them on my TV." And there, my friend said, his life kind of flashed before his eyes. He said, it might be over. But the guy put out his hand, he said, "If some of y'all are Kenny Stabler fans, then not all of y'all can be that guy." And he shook his hand. And my point from that story, again, is that, again, you need to meet people where they are and not try to bring them to you, but rather to go to where they are, societally, socially, and to see what might be something that would draw them in. In this case, of course, it was sports and devotion to the Oakland Raiders, but there are a host of things that can bring people together to open their minds and their hearts towards doing the right thing without being judgmental and trying to make them feel that they're wrong from the outset, even if we feel that way. And so less condemning and more open again for people to come and to learn about whomever they might have prejudices, fears, in some cases even hate towards, given a certain circumstance. So those are just some of the thoughts I had on this issue. But again, I'm grateful to be part of this discussion. I look forward to your questions in the discussion.
Thanks, Helen. I like that visual of on-ramp, and I too am from the Bay Area, and who would have ever thought that Kenny Stabler would have played that role? But it's really hopeful to think that way. Mohammed?
Thanks so much. I just want to start off by thanking John and his team, and Eric and your team here at AFT for the work that you do, and keep teachers plugged in. They serve a very important role in this. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll kind of come out my comments sort of in sort of 3 distinct buckets. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work we did at the Department of Education. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Stevens Initiative, which I'm currently working on. Excuse me. I'll tell you a little bit about a fun project that I decided to do as sort of my way to make a little bit of a change in the world. So my family came to the United States in the mid-70s. My parents had just graduated from college in Egypt. My dad met my mom in a physics lab. He thought she was cute, and he proposed to her. They got married and moved to the United States to do their masters and their PhDs. My parents are physics nerds. And so I was born in New York City. We later moved to upstate New York, and I spent a lot of my childhood going back and forth between the United States and Egypt to see family during the summers. And I often share this story because I think it's just really illustrative that when I would go to Egypt, my cousins, when I was playing outside with them, they would ask me a lot of questions about the United States. If I'd met Michael Jackson, if I'd met Sylvester Stallone, things about sort of asking about everything from Ferraris to firearms, right? And I had to answer a lot of these questions that I thought were so basic and so simple, but then I realized that they had a particular image of the United States from what they saw on TV, which was largely 80s action shows. Then on the flip side, when I was at home in New York, and then later when my family moved to South Carolina, got a lot of very similar questions. And I grew up at a time in sort of the early 80s where the Iran hostage crisis was fresh. And I remember being on the playground and kids would ask me if I was a hijacker, and I had no idea what that meant. They'd asked me if I was Iranian, and I was like, no, my family's from Egypt. But then I also noticed that a lot of their questions were not really questions, they weren't coming at it from they didn't want to flatter me, let me put it that way. So I very quickly had to explain and try to educate, try to understand, and I sort of want to draw on the theme that Sohaila brought up, that a lot of times these interactions that we have, excuse me, are teachable moments. So I think it's appropriate that I share that here at AFT. These are teachable moments where, sometimes often I think when folks come at you with a bit of aggression in their tone, or they're accusatory, or they're making blanket statements, there's really an opportunity to draw those questions out. Well, tell me more. What do you mean about that? What do you mean by that? Have you had, have you met someone? Have you spent some time with anyone who's Muslim? Have you been to their house for dinner? And you can tend to tease out some of these, some of the cracks. You can get in those cracks and have a conversation. So I think that's really, really, really important. That for me was, those were a lot of very important lessons that I learned early on, and frankly had informed my my career choices at one point in time. I think as a political science major, as most do, I considered a path in law, and then after looking at a common law book, I decided that wasn't really going to be the path that I wanted to pursue. Nor was it path sort of I considered going into the Intel community, but actually thinking about education, thinking about helping institutions. In my case, most of my career has been in higher ed. Helping institutions train young people and get young people to have experiences around the world and to open their mind was going to be the path for me to make the change that I wanted to see in the world, to borrow that for that narrative. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the resources that I think are there for you guys at the U.S. Department of Education. I often say it because not a lot of people know about it. There's two that I think are very helpful for teachers, in addition obviously to the Office of Civil Rights, which I think you all are very familiar with, and they do very important work there. Hopefully that office will stay intact. I think I can't talk about OCR without mentioning that. That's a very, very, very important office, and I certainly hope that the public will pay attention to what happens in the coming months. Second of all, I'll mention, in my time at the department, I oversaw the Title VI and Fulbright Hays programs. These are the primary international education programs at the Department of Education. These programs aren't just important because they teach kids how to speak other languages, or young people, right? So we primarily have focused on post-secondary education. These programs really drive a lot of the global competency we see, and a lot of the expertise in this country around different world areas, understanding world areas and training experts, and also training young people to have high levels of language fluency. Now, that's done through grants that are given primarily to higher education institutions. I have to note that these centers, there's 100 of them across the country. They don't just focus on any one region. So I'm coming at this from a little bit more of a broader sense. They all have a K-12 outreach component. So there's 100 of them across the country. They're called the National Resource Centers. Please look them up. Some of these programs I'll mention as to focus a little bit more on the Middle East, and in this particular case, Islamophobia. There's a program that I'll mention out of the University of Washington called the Building Bridges program, or Bridging Cultures, I believe. And what they do is they actually will go around to different school districts and help train educators. They will train superintendents, they'll train teachers on how to integrate students from Muslim-majority countries into their classroom. They've got lesson plans, they've got a lot of great material, and they'll help educators navigate through sometimes pretty tough issues, pretty complicated issues, especially when you have sort of high populations of, for example, new immigrants or new Americans in the community. There are some issues that teachers may need some extra support in navigating, and that center has a program that's a resource. Right up the road at Georgetown, the National Resource Center on the Middle East of Georgetown also has some similar resources, lesson plans, teacher trainings. They do workshops that will expose educators to not just the Muslim tradition, but the Jewish tradition as well. So as I mentioned, the Title VI programs, there's 100 of them around the country. These are primarily focused on different world areas. There are 14 that focus on the Middle East, and I think like 13 that focus on South Asia, 13, 14 that focus on Latin America. So for the educators who are in the room, or those of you who work with teachers, if you want to inform some of the work that you're doing in the classroom, to talk about different parts of the world or where people come from, or some of the issues that they face, to help inform some of the discussions that you're having with your students, these are awesome resources to tap into. So I would highly encourage you to do that. The second thing I want to talk about from some of our work at the Department of Education that I think is relevant, and I just tweeted out what we call the Framework for Cultural and Global Competencies. It's the Framework for Cultural and Global Competencies. I just tweeted it out on my Twitter accounts, MAKTWEETER. MAKTweeter is my handle, and you'll find a link to that framework. So I'd encourage you to take a look at it. This was a process. We essentially went through a process of bringing in folks from different parts of the department, different partners from outside of the department, different colleagues from different agencies, to pull together what we thought was a framework. Obviously, we didn't want to recreate the wheel. There's a number of frameworks out there on cultural and global competency, but really thinking about, what are some of the outcomes we want to see in students, right, who are culturally and globally competent. So again, this isn't directly about Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, but really more so of sort of the skills and the traits that we want our students to embody, all while maintaining sort of discipline-specific knowledge, right? So you want your engineer to be culturally and globally competent. You want your student who's going to go into a career in public health or medicine to be culturally and globally competent, not just because of, what some would call, I think the official term is the kumbaya moments, right? It's not really just because of that. I think, frankly, it makes sense from a national security perspective. It makes sense from an economic competitiveness perspective as we expand into new markets and deal with people from around the world. We want our young people to be skilled, to have the ability to understand difference, to be able to navigate some of these sometimes gray issues. They have to have the skills. So this is a little bit of a framework that outlines a couple of things like collaboration, world heritages and languages, things like understanding diverse perspectives, and then finally civic and global engagement. And what we've done is sort of put that on a continuum for early learners all the way into those who have launched their careers. So take a look at it. We hope you'll share it. I hope you'll get it out into the hands of educators. And again, that was sort of a collaborative effort that we're really, really proud of. And I hope that type of thinking in our classroom will help STEM and sort of will help essentially cut off some of the bigotry that we're seeing and the lack of understanding. The next thing I want to talk about is, is the Stevens Initiative, which is a program that I'm working with right now at the Aspen Institute. It's a public-private partnership that is named in honor of Ambassador Chris Stevens, who died tragically a number of years ago in Libya. You all, I'm sure, will remember. Essentially, what we do is virtual exchange. So we pair up students in the United States with students in the Middle East, and they get online in a collaborative learning experience that is facilitated by educators. These students are digging into STEM issues. They're talking about language. They're also talking about culture. Some of these students are coding together and developing apps online. We have some students in Chicago paired with students in Morocco, and they're building an online museum where they're essentially putting together a model of a Stegosaurus fossil that was found outside of Casablanca. And in that process of virtual collaboration, they are building cultural and global competencies, which are very, very important in this day and age. So again, it's not just targeted on Islamophobia front and center, but it's giving students, facilitating these collaborative experiences where students get to work together and learn together. And through that process, we hope that some of these differences will also be understood. So check out the Stevens Initiative. Our website is www.stevensinitiative.org. We have primarily worked with students and obviously teachers and universities, colleges and universities, high schools and middle schools. So the age range that we're hitting is 15 to about 25. We're in our second year right now, and we're looking to expand to more institutions in more countries in the future. So definitely check that out. The third thing that I'll talk about is sort of a fun little project that a number of years ago I had an interaction while I was in graduate school in Nashville, where someone was essentially advocating for, excuse me, religiously profiling Muslims at airports. And I said, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. And he said, well, don't you think that we should pull aside Muslims because all this bad stuff is happening and it's really coming out of the Muslim world? And I said, okay, so tell me more, who are you going to pull aside? And the gentleman gave me sort of a half-baked answer. And I said, here's why that is never going to work. And I gave him some statistics around who Muslims in the United States were. So some of you may know the largest population of Muslims in this country actually are African Americans, around 30 to 35%, followed by folks from South Asian descent, so roughly about 22, 23%. And then folks who are from the Arab Middle East at about 15%. Actually, most Arabs in this country are Christian, so this gentleman clearly didn't know that. So my point was, you really don't know who you're looking for. I then had an experience at an airport when I was flying in to see my parents, where the gentleman in the TSA line looked at my boarding pass and said, hey son, what kind of a name is that? And I said, and I was feeling a little obnoxious, and I said, well, it's an Arab Muslim name, sir. And he said, oh, that's funny. You don't look like a Muslim. And I was wearing my Adidas baseball cap, and I had a little bit shaggy hair back then, and I said, well, that's interesting. I said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, you just don't look like a Muslim. I said, okay, well, what does a Muslim look like? And he said, well, not you. And I said, okay, well, thanks. He gave me my boarding pass. He said, have a nice day. And in that moment, I actually didn't think he was trying to be a jerk. I think he didn't know any better. So I was thinking about, what do I do about this thing? What do I do about this issue of people just not knowing and not knowing, frankly, the numbers, to your point, Mary, people not understanding the data or the demographics. I was in grad school at the time, and I was in this mode of writing and research. I started writing a book, and I was going to write a book about the Muslim community in America and what it looks like and the demographics and the statistics. And I got about a chapter or two into it, and frankly, it was like, oh my God, this is so boring. I wouldn't even go to Barnes & Noble and buy my own book. It was really dry. So I kind of thought long and hard, and I was like, well, this is such an easy message. A kid would get it, right? Sometimes kids are pretty insightful. So I ended up writing a children's book called What Does a Muslim Look Like? That's essentially a picture book for kids. I often say kids of all ages, aka adults who probably need to read it. But for me, it was more about finding a different channel and a different medium to articulate a point. I think sometimes as practitioners, we get really hung up on, I shouldn't say the research is important, but sometimes we get so hung up on these very sort of academic and very heavy ways of communicating ideas. And for me, this was this way. It was actually a very easy way to articulate a point with a lot of color, with some rhyme, and it was actually a lot of fun. I'll pass around the copy in a little bit if you guys want to take a look at it. But I think that's sort of what I would encourage folks to think about, is think about new ways to tell the story, but rooted in the data, right? Because the data is really important. But tell it through film. So I love seeing, obviously, some of the film projects we saw earlier. Think about children's books. Think about just connecting. I mean, I think after the election, a lot of folks had a lot of time for self-reflection and thought to themselves, well, when was the last time I crossed the street? I know certainly the Muslim community folks were saying, well, when was the last time you crossed the street and knocked on your neighbor's door and, hung out with them on the porch and just sort of talked? Because there's a lot of commonalities there, and I think, similar to the point about the gentleman in the football stadium, there are a lot of points of intersection in our lives, and I think we sometimes neglect to have those conversations in our communities. So I'll leave my comments at that, and we can always come back and revisit.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all the panelists. This has been great, and I think you've given us a lot of food for thought and ways in which we can combat the issue that that brings us here today. And I'd like to open this up to a discussion among the panelists, and please, you all join as well and think about two things. One, what role education can play in combating this, which is what brings us here today, and also how can we mobilize activists and interest groups to engage in this further, because we certainly need help. But before I do that, I just wanted to say, a couple years ago, the High Commissioner for Human Rights spoke spoke at the Holocaust Museum. He himself is Jordanian. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said something like 9 of the 15 architects of the Holocaust had PhDs. And then he went on to say that, you know, education devoid of a moral, of a human rights universal component is useless. And that just kind of stuck with me. You know, we can all focus on educating kids and young people about what they're supposed to be learning about, but without that moral component, you know, I think we really need to think about how we can interject that into the traditional, the formal education process. But I wanted to start by something that Mira said, that, you know, we talk about how education can be a way to combat religious bigotry. But at the end of the day, if you said, what is it, 1/4 of the perpetrators, you know, were teachers and administrators, what do we do? I mean, where? What's an approach that can tackle that? I'm not asking you. I'm asking anybody here who cares to interject. Yeah, please,
So one of the things that I work on is actually specifically on Jewish-Muslim relations, and they're a longer story, and I don't want to get too bogged down into it, but I work to take first American imams from all over the country that have real constituencies, real followings, from all over to Auschwitz and Dachau to learn about the Holocaust. And it was because of some of my work in the Middle East, I found that there was a lot of animosity and suspicion on both sides of the Jewish-Muslim divide. And many of my Jewish friends commented that it would mean so much if Muslim, particularly in this instance, American Muslim leaders would recognize the suffering of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. And I asked, what does that mean? He said, to have powerful, well-known Muslim leaders go to the places where the murder occurred. And one of the things, and then we did it in 2009, working with the last administration, and then we did another trip with international imams from all over Indonesia, Nigeria, Palestinian territory, Jordan, Pakistan, India, Saudi Arabia, to the same places. And they issued a very powerful statement in both instances condemning anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial as a form of anti-Semitism, and not only is condemning as a moral wrong, but also as something that's antithetical and against the Islamic teachings. But one of the things that came out of that, to answer the question, was many Muslims didn't even know the details of the Holocaust, and they were fascinated and shocked to learn just what you said, that otherwise very normal people were behind the actual day-to-day operations of the murder and the murder of millions. And the thing that we learned, and unfortunately throughout history, when this has happened time and time again, whether it was Rwanda or in the Yugoslavian conflict, and that is, people don't become murderers right away. There's a systemic, step-by-step process where first there is suspicion, there is stereotypes, then there is fear and hatred, then there are democratically passed laws that in the case of Nazi Germany, Jews have to wear Stars of David, they can't own businesses, they can't live in certain areas. Then those laws are passed to move those Jewish communities or Jewish residents to ghettos, and then from there ghettos to camps, from camps to murder. And so it's very important to realize that hate in its purest and most ugliest form can lead to murder, and in some instances mass murder, but it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a process of time and of conditioning, and it's so important to be for those that are in places of responsibility, of leadership in the classroom or in community, as community leaders, coaches, etc., to know that that hate is a first step, or that fear, that suspicion is a first step that can go down a road towards hate crimes, towards a synagogue or a mosque, or towards that bullying can lead to more aggressive and hateful behavior. But there is a trajectory for that, and the Holocaust obviously is the worst case, but it's important to know that there is a process for that type of violence. It doesn't just happen
I totally agree with Suhail, and I think I was thinking of sort of two ways to try and stem that from going down that road, right? Or at least the two ways that ISPU tries to stop us from going down that path. One of the ways is providing facts to combat fear, right? There's a lot of fear and there's a lot of misunderstanding because of that. And we really try to generate facts that can help combat some of those fears. So, and I think as teachers, just getting to know what those facts are so that when these accusations or things come up in your classrooms or in other places, you say, well, actually, that's not actually true. So I'll give you an example. There's this anti-Sharia legislation movement sweeping the country, right? Many states have discussed or talked about and some have passed an anti-Sharia bill in their states. And the idea is for some of the lawmakers who are doing this that Muslims somehow want to impose Sharia law in the United States, which is so absurd. I won't even go into why that's so absurd, but it's completely absurd. Because it could never happen. But, there's an idea that Muslims somehow that have this nefarious, thing that they want to impose Sharia law. We actually asked Muslims about that. We asked Muslims, Christians, Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and the non-affiliated, do you favor a role for your religious law as the basis for American law? We asked across the board. And Muslims were actually less likely than Protestants to favor a role for their religion in American law. So this craziness that Muslims somehow want to impose Sharia law is actually not factually based. And so I think that's just an example of how if you arm yourself with these facts, you can actually refute some of this nonsense pretty quickly. But one other thing I want to say is, besides being able to refute craziness, another really important way to deal with this is by reframing this discussion completely, right? Muslims are too often talked about as either dangers that need to be contained or victims that need to be saved, right? Those are sort of the only two ways that you hear about Muslims in the news or anywhere else. But there is clearly a far more nuanced way to understand the Muslim community. And one of the things that ISPU tries to do is to look at the Muslim community beyond these two ways of looking at them. So we have a project called the Muslims for American Progress Project, which actually quantifies the contributions of American Muslims in engineering, in medicine, in sports, in arts and culture. And we have found unbelievable stories through doing this research. One example is that we uncovered the story of how Muslims partnered with the residents of Flint to deal with the water crisis when that hit. And Muslims responded overwhelmingly to that crisis. If you look on the Wikipedia page for the Flint crisis, you can get all the data, or go to muslimforamericanprogress.org, which has a whole bunch of data on this. But I think understanding Muslims in a nuanced way beyond either victims or dangers is really, really, really important, and to reframe the conversation away from this very narrow discussion.
When I think about it, I think we're talking about all these great tools, and obviously we need more information. We need to get that information out there. A lot of it's based on ignorance, et cetera, but everything they were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, is passive. You have to go to that site. You have to go there. You have to. How can we think about integrating this stuff into our system, into our education? I mean, have it be a real systemic approach so that one doesn't have to go search for something, but it's a part and parcel of what every kid learns about. I'm thinking about, I grew up in California in the 1960s, and it wasn't until I got to college in the 1970s that I knew that 120,000 American citizens of Japanese descent were thrown into essentially concentration camps. It was not in our, I think I'm probably a little bit older than you, it was not in my textbook in high school. And it was right there. And it just blew me away. So I don't know what's in our textbooks today in terms of the issues that we're talking about, but I can probably guess that a lot of this stuff is not,
Yeah. make is that our American textbooks do not, even our world studies textbooks for American classrooms, most, I don't know if you know this, but most states, they share the textbooks that they use. They're from the same publisher, they're from the same powerhouse publishing groups, and they are extremely stereotypical, they're extremely biased. They do not provide a multiple perspective on many issues. The Holocaust education is certainly there. That's a new phenomenon in the last 15 years. We're seeing a lot of Holocaust education within the books. There is very little in the textbooks that address Muslim contributions throughout history to the world. There is very little talking about any kind of Muslim public figure who should be celebrated. And going back to the teachers and administrators participating in the bullying, we have to remember that a lot of our educational, people in educational institutions are teaching to a test, and I'm not going to make this about that, but what I'm trying to tell you is that the curriculum does not have room for human rights education. I do the human rights education on the side. It is not part of the curriculum. There is no avenue. A brand new teacher, they're following exactly what they need to do to make sure those students get the grade that they need on that standardized test, and there has to be an overhaul of the system. Our students and our teachers need to understand that credibility of sources is what you were saying, credibility of sources, facts, needs to be a major piece in their teaching. That the media portrayal of different types of groups of people, not just Muslims, is something that our students, they're not learning from a textbook, they're not learning from maybe a secondary source. What they're doing is they're getting their news from social media. They are a product of their parents, whose whatever their political view or geopolitical view is, they carry that with them. Our students they need help navigating this social media world and this media world, and what's out there now is negative. And so what we've been trying to do is trying to instill curriculum and change some of these textbooks. A lot of our teachers, especially in my district, at my urging, they don't use the textbook. The new teachers they don't use the textbook. We provide them with primary sources. We give them actual lessons they can take, they can do. We provide a video of me or another teacher teaching the lesson with critical questions, essential questions, so they can see how it's supposed to look. So you're right, giving them a website or a piece of data is not the answer. I don't really know what the answer is, but that's a small step. But our teachers are not learning about human rights. They're not teaching about human rights because it's not part of the curriculum, which is, I come from the public schools. It's not there.
Chime in real quick. I think Mona really underscored one particular point. I read an article the other day that talked about how much we invest in executive education for business leaders. We don't do that for educators as much. I mean, I don't quite understand why we have that disconnect. Obviously, resources are constrained at the district level, but we have to make more of an effort to invest in teacher training, especially around these issues where perspectives are important, where you may live in a part of the country that may not have a particularly diverse community, and those perspectives may not be represented. Which comes to the other point, representation matters. So to the extent schools can make room in the classroom for these types of discussions, that's important to integrate them. I think I just want to underscore that point. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Let's open it up. Down there. Yep.
Okay.
Tell us your name and.
Yeah. So my name is Paul. I'm a human rights activist from Zimbabwe, and I'm happy to be here. Just to address, I think the question, first I would like to say that, I'm glad and appreciative of Mohammed, writing books, for children so that they can, learn the dynamics of, poetry. And then I think one thing that needs to be done, now I don't know in terms of, implementation and the capital that needs to, that goes along with that, is the setting up of, social justice institutions. Now I think that may be more appropriate, let's say at college level, but I don't know in high schools, how that can be implemented, especially considering that there's, what's her name? more say, that human rights is not included, in the curriculum. So, teachers just follow, what is there. So, I don't know, but maybe, the setting up of social justice institutions in each school where, teachers and students, are informed, are given hard data and facts, about, discrimination, in this instance, Islamophobia, be it the LGBT or women.
I think that's a great idea, and I've seen it work in various high schools, but the problem with that is self-selective. So you're going to get the students that want to be there when in fact the students that probably should be there are not. And so that's what I'm interested in discussing, is how it can be systemic in nature, how it can be not only required, but just sort of part and parcel integrated into everything that you do. Karen, you had a question. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I'll reflect on it is a slightly, perhaps a different context, but I think it's informative. So a number of years ago, I was working at Georgetown University, and I decided to enroll in the executive MBA program. And the third person, or the second person to come speak to us when we started the program, after the program director, was a gentleman named Father Kevin O'Brien, who was one of the Jesuits on campus. And he talked to us about what it meant to study business, to be an executive in this executive MBA program at a Jesuit Catholic institution. So he talked about, cura personalis, care of the whole, the whole person. He talked about the importance of ethics. And initially, I think some people were like, oh, this is just sort of part of the sales pitch. But what I quickly realized, and one of the things I'm very grateful for Georgetown in terms of, sort of my education, was that in every course we took, there was an ethical component, and there was a global component in it. So in accounting, we talked about ethics. In finance, we talked about ethics. In strategy and marketing, we talked about ethics. And similarly, I think that's a great approach, because there is a reality that sometimes a curriculum is pretty tight, right? That you have to get students from point A to point B by the end of the year. And it's really tight, there's finite resources. But I don't see why this stuff cannot be integrated. Why these lessons cannot be part of it, because it informs that context, right? So as a business person, I need to understand the ethical dimensions of where I'm going to allocate resources or how I'm going to segment a market. So we can't, I think we need to stop seeing things as a binary, as an either or, but rather an integrative approach.
Now Karen's going to tell us how we do that.
No, I was just well, I think part of the challenge is, identifying partners and communities where we can do training, so we can work with teachers on recognizing just that. How can you map in, as opposed to a freestanding course or within the math course, how do you use a lesson where you're looking at, you can talk about the Garmin Bank, right, and banking and microfinance. Like, there are ways to do it, but it takes time and it takes work, really intense, work, so teachers then becomes natural to map it in. But I really wanted to reflect as well. I appreciated your comments, but I think the piece that's really sticking with me and I'll walk away with is this idea, how do you meet people where they are? And I found this particularly challenging over this past year, and found myself saying, I'm coming really close to you and you're not coming to me at all, and I'm finding this really frustrating, particularly in the context
That's because she has two teenagers.
This idea of this human rights framework, and how do we understand the world through this lens. I mean, part of what we try to do at Speak Truth to Power, absent those direct experiences, say, okay, here are 5 individuals. If we can learn about their experiences and kind of start to unpack some of these stories and these questions, the lens will broaden without the direct experience. But then when we come to the advocacy piece, that's where, I hate the idea of draw a line in the sand because it's so, whatever. But when you have teachers that are bullying students, or you have policymakers who are saying things that are discriminatory, violating human rights, violating our own laws, then there's no meeting that. Like, there needs to be a level of accountability, and I think that as a community that cares about inclusion and justice and fairness and human rights, that we understand there's a difference, and particularly for our youth, there's a difference between how do we have a conversation and be inclusive and broaden everyone's lens, and how do we then say no? If you're a teacher, you're in a position of power, and you're bullying a student because of their religion or whatever the dynamic, Jamie Nabosny because he's gay, whatever there's no meeting that person. There's no, that's a violation that needs to be stopped, and that's about accountability. And so I will walk away with some of that in my head, because it's kind of that balance that we constantly struggle with. But particularly as we see people in power advancing policies and language that is discriminatory and that is hurtful and not inclusive. And so that's kind of what's in my head right now.
Thanks, Karen.
If I can comment on that. No, I see what you're saying, and I agree. I think the operative word that you use is balance. You know, and I don't want to get political here, but I think, again, and that's why I spend a little bit of time talking about how our country is divided into silos. So certain words can mean different things to different people, you know. So an example, and again, this is not to put Secretary Clinton down, but, you know, when she was commenting on many of the statements that then candidate Donald Trump made, and she said called people who were many of the supporters deplorables, that I get that she was saying from a moral perspective. But I can tell you that right away, many followers, and there were 63 million people that voted for Donald Trump. So, I'm hard pressed to believe, and I know they're not all misogynistic, homophobic, racist people. People come and they vote for candidates for different reasons. And I can tell you that when that statement was made, people right away, it backfired I would argue, to the very people that I'm trying to reach. Because right away people said, well, I'm a deplorable. And it became a badge of honor. And even if they weren't racist, homophobic, misogynist people, they said, look, if she's going to look down on me, then, I'm going to wear that badge proudly. I mean, there was a great Saturday Night Live skit when Scarlett Johansson was hosting a couple weeks ago, where they had a dog. They had invented a device where the dog could talk. And, the dog, when it has this little helmet on them, and they were saying, oh, I like walks, I like, treats, I like dog food, and I love Donald Trump. And right away, the scientist, played by Scarlett Johansson, said, oh my God, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's just a dog. And the dog says, what's not to like? The Dow's up, he's great. She says, no, he's just a dog, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And the dog says, it's that condescending attitude that got Donald Trump elected. And again, I'm not trying to comment on people's politics, but again, we don't want to put people into boxes where they feel like they need to fight their way out. I go back to that term of on-ramp. We have if somebody's being bullied, obviously you need to stop that and condemn it. But I'm talking about overall attitude. I'm talking about overall attitudes, where you're going to have kids whose parents voted for Donald Trump. I'm just use that as an example, right? Politically, that's the world we live in today. Who voted for Donald Trump for a host of reasons, and I want to be very careful that we don't back people up against a wall where they feel like they need to either accept what we're trying to promote or fight their way out. Again, you want to give them the room to come and meet you, particularly with children.
But similarly, that has to be a two-way street.
I agree.
Right? And what my challenge is, I'm finding it not coming the other way. And I live in a heavily Trump area, and I'm not finding it come the other way. I try to take my Quaker beliefs out there very clearly and open up. And I'm not, so that's my personal challenge, is what I'm walking away from here kind of in my head. So I'm not arguing with you, but from my personal experience, I feel like that's got to come this way too. And I've never called anyone deplorable, and but the on-ramp needs to be on both sides of the highway.
We need to wrap up. We have about 2 minutes left.
I was going to say that in our community, in our school system, our high schoolers have to do community service. They have to have a certain number of hours. There's no reason why you couldn't say, and some of those hours must be at such and such a social justice, give them a list of social justice places, and be fair about it, because I'm sure there are Republican type ones as much as there are Democratic ones. So I think we could possibly sort of legislate that in with the regulations they have on community service. And these are good kids, and they're ready to learn. Their minds are eager. I don't think that they particularly listen to their parents at that stage. I think that comes along a little later when they really know they're indoctrinated. But, I think that that's a way to do it.
Yeah, good point.
Just a couple of quick thoughts. I think the experiences in my life that sort of woke me up were the ones where I experienced address this, I think, up front personal. I think experiential learning is incredibly important to the world we live in. The other thing I'll say, and again, I'll borrow something from my business school education, is enlightened self-interest. That the reality is, for a lot of us as Americans, we are isolated from the rest of the world, and we live in a country that has been isolated from a lot of the world's problems. But I think to the extent educators can bring sometimes this abstract topic, you know, like a lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers and college students may say, yeah, human rights, that's right, yes, I'm all for it, but do they really understand how it pertains to their own community? I think that's something we need to do a little bit better job of tying back into them. The last thing I'll say is I think we also need to borrow a playbook from the LGBT community, is that with a lot of the issues that they faced, this was a multiple year evolution, right? That, you know, sort of Ellen DeGeneres and her having a show and sort of, you know, introducing herself into our living rooms, and various characters on TV, like that really changed the way people perceived the gay community. As people started to come out and interact with folks from the LGBT community, began to develop a certain level of comfort. So, you know, again, the long game is important in terms of keeping that in mind. The other thing I'll say from a you know, in terms of politicians, I was just reflecting the other day on, I'm a huge U2 fan. They've just launched their Joshua Tree tour, and I was reflecting back a couple of years ago when they launched the global, I believe it was the Global AIDS Fund or Project Red, and I remember Bono was very involved, and there was a lot of critique as to why he was spending so much time with Jesse Helms, who, if you guys remember him, the senator from North Carolina, who was really probably not going to be a big supporter of that work, but he also came at him from a very sort of evangelical and Christian message, and that over time, with a lot of patience and a lot of persistence, sort of, he was able to steer the Titanic, and in some ways, that's what it is. I mean, again, if you go back to you know, sort of Americans' perspectives on issues like, you know, same-sex marriage, that happened over years, and now more and more Americans don't see it as a threat, right? So I think in some ways we have to take a little bit, I shouldn't say to ignore the short-term challenges, you know, like Phil said, when there is bullying, that has to stop. When there is something that is going to affect people's safety, which it certainly does. Let's raise some flags here. When someone says X, it does affect kids getting beat up on the playground, and there hasn't been a lot of accountability to that. We're seeing it some with the business community when they pull, you know, sort of advertising revenue from a particular show that may have said something that was pretty disgusting. But that same pressure should be applied to politicians, because in some ways our system has been a little bit disrupted in the last few years. So we have to think about the different mechanisms and the different allies that are not our traditional allies to help put that pressure on the system to adjust and to change this way.
The one thing my mother taught me is that we as Muslims, it is our responsibility to reach out to the multi-faith community. It is our responsibility to teach others about our religion. We can't sit back and let other people do it for us. And that's a huge component to this. So I forgot to say that.
I want to thank everybody, particularly the American Federation of Teachers, Eric, and your colleagues, and to Mira and Mona and Sahel and Coleman, thank you very much. And I would like to think of this as just being the beginning of a conversation among us all that we can carry through. And please do what you can to again, this is not required anywhere. So we depend on people to you. Toledo, Ohio.